Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're happy to have you here talking a little bit about measuring customer satisfaction. My name is Chris Cinieri, and I'm a project manager with Polaris MEP. I welcome you this afternoon. And it's a bit of a timely topic. It's something that has been coming up a lot in visits that I've had with several companies. And we had run this webinar about a year ago, and we've gotten a lot of good response to it in terms of where companies are on their journey with measuring customer satisfaction. For some companies, they're completely reactive, which is, the customer calls or emails and we respond. And some companies are on the other end and they're very proactive about it, and they're using tools such as surveys, outreach, customer meetings, etc. And I find most people fall somewhere in the middle. So we're going to talk today a little bit about, what is the importance of it? Why are we tracking this? What can we do with the information? And I'm happy to save some time at the end for some questions and answers. So let's begin with our program. Okay. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Polaris MEP, we are a nonprofit manufacturing consultant in the state of Rhode Island. We work with Rhode Island manufacturers only. We are part of a national organization, the National Institute for Standards and Technology. The MEP in our name stands for Manufacturing Extension Partnership. And you can see on your screen a little bit of the impact that the Manufacturing Extension Partnership has, and specifically for Rhode Island, Polaris MEP has on our area's manufacturers. And we help in all different areas to include quality management systems, lean manufacturing. We help with things such as cybersecurity and sales and marketing and website design, and almost anything that somebody would have a need for. We ask that you reach out to us. And if we can help you directly, great. And if not, we have a vetted third-party network of providers who can do so. And on average, when you engage with a local MEP center, there's a 13-to-1 return on your dollar for invested activities. So a really, really great way and a really great place to start when you're talking about different options for different needs that manufacturers may have. So we're here today to talk about customer satisfaction. And one of the most important things to note is when we talk about customer satisfaction, no news does not equal good news, or at least not necessarily. So we'll be talking about this topic. It's often overlooked, as I mentioned earlier, in many organizations, but it can yield some of the most actionable and insightful information when we harvest it properly. So my goal is to leave some time, like I said, at the end for questions and comments. And my contact information will also be at the end if there's anything that I can help you with. And you're also going to receive an email with a link to a survey to measure your satisfaction with today's webinar. We do this after every presentation to see what works, what doesn't work, and how we can improve moving forward. So I greatly appreciate your time in taking that afterwards. And it ties nicely with today's topic. This is what it'll look like, so please be on the lookout for that. The other thing, too, to note is we're going to go through a lot of information quickly today, and you're going to see a lot of slides with a lot of information. If you take our feedback survey that's going to be coming out after, you'll get a copy of these slides. So don't feel as though you have to write down and try to keep up. We will send you a copy of these slides if you take our survey as a token of appreciation. Okay, so I'm going to start with a bit of a disclaimer. Okay, we're going to mention certain quality standards here, such as ISO, during this webinar. But you absolutely do not need to be certified to benefit from our discussion today. I do a fair amount of auditing, and I found in my experience that many companies tend to have a firm grasp on some sections of a quality management standard and a bit of a weaker grasp on others. So I'll give you an example. Whenever I audit, let's say a machine shop, I'll usually find that they have a strong calibration program, because after all, measurement is their business. So yeah, every once in a while you find something, but generally that's a good program. In other areas of the standard, sometimes there's a little bit less emphasis put on it. So things like interested parties, organizational knowledge, and customer satisfaction. So I thought a good place to start would be to briefly review some of these standards requirements when we're talking about measuring customer satisfaction. So again, if you're not currently certified, don't worry. I'm going to go through this just to tell you that if you are an ISO certified company, measuring customer satisfaction is something that you shall do. Okay. So when we talk about ISO 9001, this is probably the most ubiquitous quality management standard. Right? This is the one most companies will have or start with. And clause 9.1.2 tells us the organization shall monitor customers' perceptions, okay, to the degree for which their needs and expectations have been fulfilled. We shall determine the methods for obtaining, monitoring, and reviewing this information. And then it goes on to give us a note with some examples of what those monitoring avenues could be. Okay, so things like surveys, meetings, etc. Now, one thing I like to point out here is wherever the standard says shall, okay, if you're certified, you know that shall means you must, because if you don't, you're going to have a major finding. So we have to do this. But I'd like to point out, because it does not say shall retain documented information. And in the standard, wherever it says shall retain documented information, it means we have to have something written somewhere. So sometimes people will say to me, well, Chris, it doesn't say shall retain documented information, so we don't have anything objective to show you, but we do it. But customer satisfaction is also an input into your management review process. And your management review process shall retain documented information. So somewhere you have to have documented information that you've talked about customer satisfaction, how you go about monitoring it, how you're doing, etc. Okay, so we do have to do it. Not a whole lot here. It just says that we shall monitor it and we shall determine what we need to do. Okay, for those of you in the aerospace arena, AS9100 takes those ISO 9001 requirements we just spoke of, and it adds a little bit more to it. It tells you the information to be monitored and used shall include, but is not limited to, and then it goes on to point out a few different things, and specifically the service or product conformity, on-time delivery performance, complaints, and corrective action requests. And we have to develop and implement plans for improvement based on those customer satisfaction responses. Okay, so ISO 9001 tells us we have to capture it. AS9100 tells us what we should be capturing at minimum, and then that we shall do something about it. Okay, and then for those of you in the medical device world, it talks about we have to document how to obtain and use the information, as well as the procedures for the process of doing so. So probably the most detailed of all the standards here when we're talking about gathering customer satisfaction information is when we're dealing with medical devices. So I show you that, for those of you who haven't seen these before, they are requirements when you start to talk about quality management systems. And getting ahead of that, being proactive, can really help you and your business in terms of gathering actionable data that you can trend and that you can take action upon. So in my experience, the discussion around customer satisfaction usually goes like this, and you can tell me if it's more or less the same for you. I'll go into a company and I'll do an audit and I'll ask, are you currently measuring customer satisfaction? And they'll say, oh, yes. And I say, great, okay, well, how do you go about doing that? And they say, oh, we have a survey. So I say, excellent, can we see it? And here's where it gets interesting. How often do you send this survey? And a lot of companies will tell me annually, or maybe semi-annually. And even more interesting, I'll ask, who gets the survey? And the response I get is most often some subset of our customers, okay? Some subset of our customers, not every single customer, but top 10% revenue generating customers, or top 10% in volume, or some metric like that. Okay. So last year, I read a really great autobiography of Lou Gerstner Jr., who was a former CEO of IBM. And there was a time in the late 80s and early 90s when IBM was in danger of being broken into smaller businesses and sold because of poor profitability. So when Lou was brought in as CEO from RJR Nabisco, he had to be a turnaround CEO, and this is part of what he found. So I took this right from the book, and this is the quote. The way we measured customer satisfaction was to ask our sales force to pick some of their customers and ask them to complete a survey. Well, IBM does not hire dumb salespeople. They pick their best customers, and we were getting lots of positive data and absolutely fooling ourselves every day. And when I read this quote, that's when it clicked for me. A lot of times we're sending surveys to subsets of our customers, and oftentimes we're sending them to the companies and the buyers that we have a good relationship with. Okay, so those folks that we talk to often, those folks that maybe we've taken out to dinner, those folks that what have you, they tend to be the ones that we're sending out the surveys to when we need an answer, because we know that they'll send us back something good. Okay. So in all of my time auditing, I've never come across a survey with poor marks, and it made me go back to and think of this: are we surveying the right subset of customers? Now, again, you might be sitting there and thinking, we survey 100% of customers, we send a survey after every order, and that's great, that's wonderful. For companies that break it up into some kind of a metric, again, such as top 10% or such, you might want to think about, are we capturing the full picture? Or are we truly getting the full picture? Okay, so in reality, the companies are handling customer feedback far more often through other means, such as emails, phone calls, meetings, maybe supplier corrective action requests. The issue with that is that, with the exception of supplier corrective action requests, the other data usually isn't tabulated into something meaningful. It's usually not captured somewhere, okay? The email is either filed away or deleted or forgotten about. The phone call, we hang up the phone, okay, and it's not captured somewhere, etc. So that data can't be used for trending. The surveys are what is often used for trend analysis, because it's objective data that we've proactively sought. But if we've fallen into the trap of sending it to our best customers, our best buyers, etc., then that information is going to be great. So we really want to make sure we have a system where we can capture those emails and those phone calls that come in throughout the year, and we want to trend those. Now, for some companies, they'll set up folders in Microsoft Outlook, let's say, and they'll file the emails away in there. And when it comes time, they can do a quick search and see, are we trending up? Are we trending down? Some companies go beyond that to create a Pareto analysis. So perhaps they create a handful of categories that the complaint may fall into, and they track it that way. It gives you even more actionable data, gives you even more of an idea of where to start. Okay. So the important thing here is you're receiving customer feedback all year long. You want to put something in place where you can easily capture and go back to and tabulate that data. So for phone calls, maybe we open up a quick Word file or a quick shared, spreadsheet on a network drive somewhere. where everybody can just quickly log, had a phone call with this customer and this was their issue, and here's, who I'm assigning it to, let's say. So how do we measure customer satisfaction in a meaningful way? What does a good system look like for capturing and reporting customer feedback? Well, let me ask a question. Why are you in business in the first place? You're in business to solve your customers' problems. That's why you're in business, okay? More specifically, the products and services that you offer solve some business challenge that your customer has. When you think of it this way, I'll now ask the question, are business challenges always static or do they change? So Peter Drucker famously said, innovate or die. Companies have historically applied this wisdom when addressing competition, but not customers. So your competition is changing. They're adopting new technologies. They're doing R&D into new products, and we're all trying to keep up and outpace them. But our customers are innovating as well. Do our products and services continue to meet their business challenges? Customers rarely leave us because it took 2 phone calls or 2 emails to get a response, or we took a few days to get back to them. Customers rarely leave because of that, okay? They rarely leave because something arrived 2 days late against the due date, okay? They leave when your product or service no longer provides a solution to them. Oh, and are they always going to call us and tell us? Maybe not. So having that close contact with the customer to understand their needs. What are some of the things on the horizon at your company? How can we help? What should we be looking at to help grow with your business and make sure our products and services stay relevant so that they don't stop and shop around to somebody else who has an emerging technology or such that meets their changing needs? So that's probably one of the more important reasons to have close communication with the customer, to make sure that we are staying on top of their needs. After all, we're in business to solve their challenges. And if we no longer solve their challenges, they have no use for our products and services. So for anyone on the call who's part of the sales team, I apologize. I mean no offense with this slide, but I hear this a lot. When we talk to sales teams, they'll always tell us, we have our finger on the pulse of the customer. We know exactly what the customer needs. We know exactly where we stand with them and how we're doing, etc. And it's true that sales teams are usually the ones tasked with collecting customer feedback. Usually, not all the time. Okay. But you want to always seek to understand from whom they collect it. So a lot of times when sales teams go out to solicit customer feedback, whether they're having an impromptu phone call with the customer or they've set up an on-site meeting, however they've done that, you want to ask the question, who are you talking to? Because usually they're going to talk to the buyer or the purchasing manager or whomever it is that they do business with. Okay. And that person on that end is usually somewhat removed from the end user of your product. So you think about the buyer is just placing POs with the company, okay? And then your part ends up on the dock and goes into the product realization process of your customer. It gets installed, it gets used, okay? But that relationship and that experience may not necessarily make its way to the buyer's office. So the buyer may very well say, hey, no news is good news. Everything's going well. Thanks so much. Meanwhile, the end users in the shop, on the shop floor, are struggling to make something fit. They're struggling to get something to work correctly. They're struggling with something, and we're not getting that feedback because we're not soliciting it directly from the end user. Why is it important to seek out that feedback? Let me use an example from the restaurant industry. So I have a friend, owns a restaurant, and tells me that in the restaurant business, your best clients, your best customers, are the ones who complain. And the reason for that is, for every customer who complains, there are 10 others who had the same or similar experience and did not complain and will not be back and are going to tell their friends and family not to go. Oh, and by the way, with social media today, they can tell hundreds of people effortlessly not to go and patronize your restaurant. So when somebody brings something to your attention that was not part of your attention, it gives you that opportunity to correct it. And that's why the customer who complains is the best customer in the restaurant industry. So we really want to make sure that we're talking not only to the customer, but to the right people at the customer. We, being Polaris MEP, sent out a survey to manufacturers prior to this, and we asked a couple of questions on how you're currently measuring customer satisfaction, and we received 52 responses, which, if you ever send out surveys, you know that you send out 10 to get one. So 52 is not a bad lot. And we asked, how does your organization currently measure customer satisfaction? So I don't know if there's anything on this chart that is telling to some who are on the call with us today, but you want to note that not all companies who responded are necessarily certified to a quality standard that we mentioned before. But one of the things that's telling for me is the emails have the highest, almost half. And I question and I wonder, does that mean they have it and they do something in the very near term with it and then file it away or delete it, and they don't have that trending information? They're not able to see year over year, am I getting more of these emails or am I getting less of these emails? So that's something to keep in mind. Again, it's great that we have this. The other thing on this chart that was pretty telling to me was about 20% of people said, we don't. And that means we don't actively or we don't proactively solicit customer feedback. So everything is reactive, like we mentioned at the beginning. Okay, customers call, customers email, etc. And that goes back to my example of the restaurant, where we can't always count on the customer to reach out when there's a problem. We have to make sure we're being proactive to understand how we're doing. So if you've ever had an instance where you had a long-term customer, a repeat customer, and the purchase orders are coming in on a regular basis, it's almost like a cadence, and then one day it stops. POs aren't coming in any longer, and everybody's kind of looking around at each other and asking, what happened? What, somebody should call them. Well, that happens when they've been dissatisfied for something, they're not reaching out to us, and ultimately they found another solution. And we missed an opportunity to get better. And just like my restaurant example, are there other customers who may be experiencing the same thing because we're unaware of it internally? So glad to see that, a lot of folks are doing some proactive measures here, but do notice that about 20% of people said, no, we don't collect any formal customer satisfaction data. Another question that we asked two questions in this survey. How is customer feedback currently being used in your company? So for those who are actively seeking it out, whether it's a survey or whatnot, they're using that information mostly for product and service improvement. And service could be even something such as order taking, order entry experience, shipping, delivery experience, or it could be the service itself that you perform. Process improvement, are there things that our customers are asking of us that we could do to help them or we could do to make the product better? Pricing considerations, right? About a little over 40% said pricing considerations. So what's the feedback we're getting there and how does it stack up across the industry? Maybe we're also doing some benchmarking. during this exercise, and we're getting a sense of where we stand in the marketplace in terms of, are we a price leader, et cetera. New products and services was another one, almost 40%. And new products and services could also be improvements upon, so it could be an existing SKU that now does some new functionality. And then a couple of, there's a handful that said none of the above, and maybe it's just being filed away for trending. Okay, but we are using this information for those who are capturing it. We are using it for some good things within our organization. Think about the discussions that you have as a leadership team around strategy, around process improvement, around how are we doing. And this information can really give us that outside approach to where should we be focusing our efforts and where should we be focusing limited resources. Okay, so that's a little bit about the importance of collecting customer satisfaction data, a little bit about how companies go about doing that. And, I'll tell you, I had mentioned earlier that the general rule of thumb is you send 10 surveys out and you get one in response. And I understand the frustration. If you are certified to a quality standard, I can tell you that most auditors recognize the effort. So if you sent 50 surveys out and you got, 10 back, they're not going to scold you for only getting 10. They're going to appreciate the effort you went through to be proactive. But nonetheless, there are some advancements in technology that make that process go a little bit more smoothly. So we no longer have to include a little postcard in the package. We could do a QR code on the invoice or something, or we could put a link to a survey in an email signature or on our website, or just something easy that we could direct someone to, because the easier we make it, the more likely they are to take whatever the survey is. And I'm curious to see, with some of these newer technologies that are out there, I'm curious to see where this goes to become even more easy for the end user to give us that information. But let's talk about, what does a good formal customer measurement and management system look like? And what you see on the screen now is an example that you can take and modify to suit your particular needs. So we always want to start with identifying the purpose. Why are we doing this? Why now? Okay. So if we're not formally collecting active customer satisfaction data, why do we want to start now? What do we want to do with it? Okay. What is it going to drive internally within our organization? Then we have to build the lens of the customer. So a lot of times when companies develop surveys, they're asking the questions that they want the answers to, okay, and that's important. But sometimes we neglect the questions that our customers would like to alert us to. So we have to keep that in mind. We have to sit there and say, what would the customer want to tell us or want to let us know in a feedback fashion? Okay. And then obviously we have to build the survey, and we're not going to go into that too much today, because honestly, there are a lot of great free resources out there that talk about what a good, effective survey looks like. So you build the survey, then we have to go from data to information, because if you put a survey out there and people respond to it, and you download those responses, let's say to a spreadsheet, you're gonna have a lot of data. Okay, but it's pretty meaningless until you go through it and you shake out the trends and you put it into the chart that shows you and tells the story of what's actually going on. And then we go from information to decisions. So it could be the management review meeting that we spoke about earlier, or it could be some other internal managerial meeting that you have where we present the information and say, look, this is what customers are telling us. What is our appetite for risk? Okay. What are we budgeting for? What do we want to do? Where do we want to go with this? And we take that information and we turn it into decisions. So call it a 5-step process. Again, you can modify this to suit your needs. When we identify the purpose, this may already be completed at your company, or maybe the company needs to take a step back and revisit why this is important. Are we looking to increase revenue? Are we looking to increase our customer base? Are we looking to break into new markets or new territories? Are we looking to improve our quote to close ratio? What are we trying to do? Why are we measuring this now? Are we seeking additional inputs into our continual improvement programs? So maybe we have a robust internal continual improvement program or lean program where we're getting feedback from employees, and maybe we're looking for an outside perspective to provide input. Are we seeking competitive advantage in a certain area of our business? Why is measuring this feedback important to us? So we start with identifying the purpose, because that's going to help drive the lens of the customer. So from that purpose, we know what questions we want to ask, like I said before. We're going to come up with the questions that answer what we're looking to find out. But we also want to think with the customer in mind. What do they want us to know? What would they like to see? So at this stage, there's a few things you can do. For some of you who have worked in quality for some time, you may remember quality function deployment or the house of quality, where you take customer needs and you're able to line them up towards our inputs and our capabilities and see where the strengths and weaknesses lie. Okay, so if you're using existing quality tools, continue to use those. Or quite simply, you could gather the input from the customers. So your very first survey might be, what would you like us to know? What are the things that are important to you? And we'll make sure that we pick it up from there and we seek that data moving forward. And again, what the customers think of us, not what we think of ourselves. That's what we have to stop at this point and make sure that we're capturing as we're creating the survey. What do the customers think of us, not what we think of ourselves? Because we know where all the skeletons lie in the building, and we know where some of the challenges are. Okay. And sometimes those challenges are transparent to the customer, and there are other things that they wish we knew, and we may or may not be aware. So we have to keep that in the back of our mind. So an initial meeting with a subset of customers just to get a sense of what they want us to know might be a good idea here. When we build the survey, like I mentioned, there are plenty of resources online for building a survey in terms of the types of questions to ask and the scales to use, etc. So I'm not going to bore you here with them, but it does make a lot of sense to go through and take a look at that. There's just a few points that I'd like to keep in mind for today. What the customer wants us to know, not just what we want to know. When we keep that in mind, we have to decide which market segments and populations are we going to survey. And it could be all. But for some companies, they have 10 customers. And it's I say very simple, but it's easier than the company that has 5,000 customers who are ordering, small quantities of high volume, low mix items or something. So we have to decide which market segments and populations are we going to go after. We have to decide the data collection methods. Is it an online survey? Is it a paper survey that goes along with the shipment? How are we going to collect that? Is it a QR code on an invoice or some other, piece of paperwork? What are we going to do there? And then sampling methods. If we have to sample because we have such a large customer base or what have you, we'll have to determine what that sampling method is. Okay. And one thing is to keep in mind, use technology, make it easy for the customer. Most people now can take a short survey right on their phone. They can scan a QR code and do it, hopefully in a matter of seconds, if not minutes, and you have actionable data in real time. So utilize technology where possible to make it simple and thus more attractive to the customer to take it. And there's another way that you can utilize technology. You can utilize technology now to make sense of the data, to separate the data, to take it to that next step and make it information based. And there is some really, really nice tools being put out there now using this generative AI to do this automatically, which really makes it simple. And I recently read an article about technology in action with a major luxury hotel chain in the US who has online reviews and by the thousands and the tens of thousands. And they utilize a service with this new technology to go through and kind of sort out what the data is telling us. And what they found was that greater than 40% of the reviews that are left for their hotel chain are left by people who never stayed at the hotel. What they found was that about 40% of the reviews were being left by Uber and taxi drivers who are bringing people to and picking them up from these hotels because this clientele tends to tip very well. So they felt the need to leave a good review so that more people will stay there and they'll get more business and better tips, et cetera, et cetera. So very interesting when you think that way, in terms of before they went through that exercise, I guarantee you they thought 100% of those reviews came from people who actually stayed at the hotel. So utilize technology where it makes sense to help with this and to help bring it from that data to information stage, which is this next stage. So we want to look at more than just the overall trend. Okay. Last year we had 52 customer complaints via email, via phone call, and this year we had 47. Boom, instant improvement, right? Let's all go home. Well, you don't want to look at it that way. Okay, you want to try to do some trending in terms of perhaps Pareto analysis, like we mentioned before, or look at it in terms of risk and attach a severity to it. So it could be that we had much less or much fewer complaints this year, but the overall risk and the overall severity of them was higher. Okay, it was potential failures in the field, potential harm to life safety, potential whatever. So we don't want to just look at, we went from 52 to 47. We want to look at, did the severity go up? Or something like that. So look at it in terms of Pareto and in terms of risk. Gather the attributes and the benefits noted from the lens of the customer. So what is it that's important to them? Let's make sure we have a spotlight on that information and we're not simply setting it aside so we can focus on the information that makes sense to us, and use statistical methods where necessary to provide meaningful impacts. And then going from information to decisions, think substance and not dashboards. So some companies go through this exercise so they can create the dashboards and hang them up in the plant on some monitors and such. And you really want to think, I want this information to drive decision-making and to drive strategy in my organization and not a pretty dashboard somewhere in my facility. Competition increases over time. So timely decision-making is imperative. So having this information available, meeting on it and taking action against it is critical to staying relevant, within our industry and within our workplace. And disseminate the information throughout the organization in a meaningful manner. So it's not just information for top management to review in a conference room somewhere and then put away. If you've ever had an ISO audit, your auditor may ask, do you take this information, being customer satisfaction, and share it with your teams? Do you let them know the good as well as the bad? So you want to share it throughout the organization, if only because you may get an idea from somebody that you may not have otherwise gotten in a conference room. So be sure to do that. I'm going to leave you with this final quote, again from Lou Gerstner Jr. from his book. it summarizes our topic nicely. At the end of the day, a successful focused enterprise is one that has developed a deep understanding of its customers' needs, its competitive environment, and its economic realities. So having that close relationship with the customer, understanding their needs, understanding how those needs change over time, can help us to stay relevant, to stay up to date, to know in which markets and technologies and such we should be investing in. And it's always very important. So I truly appreciate your attendance. I'd like to know if anybody has any questions now, or if you have a particularly successful method of capturing feedback that you'd like to share with everybody in the chat. Welcome to do that. You will see my contact information on your screen. If there's anything further you'd like to talk about in terms of capturing this or how to better utilize this information, especially within your QMS if you're using a quality system, always happy to talk to folks about that. But I'll open it up now if anybody would like to throw anything into chat or just unmute and throw out a question. Like I said, you'll be receiving an email with a survey like we talked about. So I particularly appreciate if you just take a quick moment to let me know how I did today and how we as Polaris MEP can make these better for you. And you'll get a copy of the slide deck in appreciation.
Yeah, we'll be sending out an email shortly after we all get off the call here with a wrap up of the information, as well as a link to that survey so that we know how we did, how Chris did, and a link to Chris's calendar so that you can set up a one-on-one call with him. Are there any questions at all? Okay, great. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you, Chris. And we hope that you have a beautiful day. We'll send you an email shortly. Take care.
Thanks so much, everybody. Take care.